Billionaire CEO shocked to find his ex-lover and twin children on a park bench, messaging for shelter in the cold. Manhattan's winter didn't knock. It kicked the door down. The kind of cold that didn't just touch your skin, it crawled inside your bones and made a home there. The wind howled down Delancey Street like it had something to prove, slicing through coats, through scarves, through every layer people thought would protect them. It was the kind of night where the city showed you who you really were. Where survival wasn't a concept. It was a decision you made every 15 minutes. On the corner of Delancey and Norfolk, beneath a streetlight that flickered like it was trying to decide whether to give up, a woman sat on a bench that had long forgotten what warmth felt like. Her name was Isabel Torres, though right now, names didn't matter. What mattered was the two small bodies pressed against her chest, breathing in shallow, synchronized rhythms. What mattered was keeping them alive until morning. The twins were 4 years old. A boy and a girl. Their faces were buried in her coat, their small hands clutching fabric like it was the only thing tethering them to the world. Isabel's arms were wrapped around them, not out of affection, but necessity. 3 bodies sharing heat that wasn't enough for one. Her phone sat in her palm. The screen was cracked in 3 places, spiderwebbing out from the center like her life had done. The battery icon blinked red. 13%. Then 12. She scrolled through her contacts with fingers that had stopped feeling anything an hour ago. Each name was a ghost of a life that felt like someone else's memory. Friends who'd drifted. Family who'd chosen sides. A whole world that had existed before everything fell apart. There was one name that made her pause. Mariana. Not family by blood, but the kind of friend who'd answered 3 a.m. phone calls back when Isabel still believed the world was fair. Back when she still had a future that looked like more than this bench, this cold, these children who deserved so much better than what she could give them. Pride spoke up in her head. It always did. It said, "You've made it this far without asking for help. Don't break now. Don't let them see you this week." But then her daughter coughed. A thin, rattling sound that cut through every argument Pride could make. A sound that said, "Your ego doesn't matter. Their lives do." Isabel typed with fingers that barely responded. The words came slow, each letter a small war against the cold. "Can we stay tonight? Just until morning. The kids are shaking and I don't know where else to go." She pressed send before she could talk herself out of it. Before Pride could wrestle the phone from her hands. Before survival instinct lost to shame. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that her frozen thumb had slipped. 1 digit in Mariana's number had shifted. One small mistake in a night already drowning in them. The message didn't go where she thought it did. 7 blocks north, in a tower of glass and steel that seemed to scrape the belly of the winter sky, Alexander Graves stepped out of a conference room that smelled like expensive cologne and exhaustion. The meeting had stretched past midnight. The kind of meeting where millions moved on words alone, where one wrong sentence could build empires or bury them. The hallway was empty. His footsteps echoed against marble floors that had been polished until they looked like dark water. The city below glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows, a million lights pretending to be stars. Alexander had stopped noticing the view years ago. Beauty lost its meaning when you saw it alone. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out expecting another legal follow-up, maybe Tokyo calling about the expansion deal, possibly his assistant with tomorrow's schedule. What he got instead stopped him mid-step. "Can we stay tonight? Just until morning. The kids are shaking and I don't know where else to go." Below the message, a location tag blinked. Auto-generated. GPS coordinates for somewhere in the Lower East Side. And above it, a name that made his chest forget how to expand. Isabel. 5 years. 5 years since she'd walked out of his life without explanation, without warning, without leaving anything behind but questions that had calcified into scars. 5 years of silence so complete it had felt like death. 5 years of wondering if she was safe, if she was happy, if she ever thought about him the way he thought about her. Every single day. Every single night. And now this. Alexander stared at the screen until the words stopped making sense. Until they were just shapes. Just light. Just impossible. The kids are shaking. Kids. Plural. His mind raced through possibilities. Wrong number. Had to be a wrong number. Some cosmic joke. Some cruel coincidence. But the name. The name was hers. And the desperation in those words. He knew that voice. He'd heard it before, once, 5 years ago, the night before she disappeared. His hand tightened around the phone. His voice cut through the empty hallway, sharp and immediate. Bring the car around. Delancey and Norfolk. Now. His driver was used to midnight runs. Used to urgency. He didn't ask questions. Within 3 minutes, Alexander was in the back seat of a black sedan that smelled like leather and decisions. The city blurred past the windows. Street lights. Late-night bodegas. People huddled in doorways trying to escape the cold. Alexander's heart was doing something it hadn't done in 5 years. It was hoping. And hope was dangerous. Hope was the thing that destroyed you when it turned out to be wrong. The car turned onto Delancey. The streets were narrower here. Grittier. This wasn't his world of glass towers and boardrooms. This was the city people forgot about unless they had to live in it. And then he saw it. The bench appeared under that dying streetlight like a photograph from a nightmare. A woman. 2 children. The kind of scene that should have had sirens, should have had help, should have had anyone but him. Alexander opened the car door before it fully stopped. His shoes hit the frozen sidewalk. The cold slammed into him with a violence he wasn't prepared for. This wasn't the cold you felt walking from a car to a restaurant. This was the cold that killed people. The woman on the bench looked up. Isabel. 5 years compressed into one single moment. One breath. One heartbeat that felt like it might be his last. She looked different. Thinner. Harder. Like the world had taken everything soft about her and beaten it into something that could survive. Her hair was longer, pulled back in a way that looked practical, not pretty. Her coat was worn at the edges, the kind of worn that said it had been through too many winters. But her eyes were the same. Dark. Deep. Holding everything she refused to say out loud. Alexander's gaze dropped to the children pressed against her chest. 2 small faces. Identical. A boy and a girl. Their eyes were closed, their breathing shallow, their skin pale in the yellow light. The silence between them was louder than the wind. Isabel spoke first. Her voice was quiet, but it had an edge that could cut. You shouldn't be here. Alexander took 1 step closer. Just one. Testing the space between them like it might shatter. Are they warm enough? His tone was steady, but there was no mistaking the tension underneath it. The barely controlled panic of seeing someone you thought you'd lost, seeing them like this. Isabel tightened her grip on the blanket wrapped around the twins. We'll survive. You should go. Alexander looked at her. Really looked at her. At the way her jaw was set. At the way her shoulders were squared even though she was shaking. At the way she was holding those children like they were the only thing in the world worth protecting. Let me help. Just for tonight. She opened her mouth to refuse. He could see it. The refusal was already forming on her lips. Already gathering force. But then the girl in her arms coughed. That same thin, rattling sound that had made Isabel send the message in the first place. A sound too small and too wrong for a body that small. Isabel's resolve cracked. Her jaw shifted. Her eyes dropped. And then she nodded. Once. Slow. Like it cost her everything. The car ride was silent in the way funerals are silent. The heater blasted warmth that turned the frost on their clothes into a faint dampness. The twins leaned against Isabel, their breathing evening out as heat slowly returned to their small bodies. Isabel kept her eyes on the window, watching the city slide past. Watching the world change from crumbling brownstones to polished high rises. From her world to his. Alexander sat across from them, his hands folded in his lap, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. But his attention never left her. Never left them. He was doing calculations in his head. Math that didn't add up. Timelines that didn't make sense. 5 years ago, Isabel had left. No explanation. No goodbye. Just gone. And now she was here. With 2 children who looked about 4 years old. The math was simple. The implications were not. The car pulled up to a building that looked like it belonged in a different universe. All glass and steel and money. The The kind of building that had a doorman who knew your name and an elevator that required a keycard. The kind of building Isabel had once known. Had once belonged in. Before everything changed. Alexander opened the car door and stepped out. The cold was still brutal, but it felt different here. Cleaner. Like even the weather knew its place. He turned back to Isabel. Come on. She hesitated. For a long moment, she just sat there, holding her children, looking at the building like it might swallow her whole. But then the boy shivered, and the decision was made. She stepped out of the car, cradling her daughter, guiding her son with her free hand. The doorman opened the door without comment, without judgment, without anything but professional courtesy. The lobby was warm. Too warm. The kind of warm that made you realize how cold you'd been. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Alexander stepped in first, then held the door for Isabel. She followed, her movements careful, like she was walking through a dream she didn't trust. They rode up in silence. 42 floors. The city dropping away beneath them. The numbers climbing. The space between them shrinking and expanding all at once. The elevator opened into a private hallway. Marble floors. Soft lighting. The kind of quiet that money bought. Alexander led them down the hall to a corner suite. He swiped his key card. The lock clicked. The door opened. The penthouse was exactly what you'd expect. Massive windows overlooking the city. Furniture that looked like art. A kitchen that gleamed like it had never been used. But it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a very expensive hotel room. Like a place someone stayed but never lived. Alexander moved through the space with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He gestured toward a hallway. Guest suite is down the hall. It's warmer there. Isabel stood in the entrance, still holding her daughter, her son clinging to her coat. She scanned the space. Not looking at the luxury. Looking for exits. Looking for danger. Looking for the trap. Alexander saw it. The way she was calculating. The way she was protecting. The way she didn't trust any of this. He spoke quietly. You're safe here. Isabel met his eyes. For a brief, charged moment, the years between them disappeared. For one breath, they were who they used to be. Before the silence. Before the leaving. Before everything broke. Then the moment passed. Thank you. Just for tonight. Alexander nodded. Just for tonight. But they both knew it was a lie. Isabel carried her daughter down the hall, her son following close behind. Alexander showed them to the guest suite. A bedroom with a king-sized bed. A bathroom with heated floors. Windows that showed the city glittering below like a promise it never intended to keep. The children immediately gravitated toward the bed, their small bodies sinking into softness they probably didn't remember. Isabel knelt down, unlacing their boots with movements that were practiced, efficient, gentle. Alexander stood in the doorway, watching. In 5 years, he'd imagined 100 ways they might meet again. None of them looked like this. None of them involved children. None of them involved her looking at him like he was a stranger. There are clean towels in the bathroom. I'll have some food sent up. Isabel didn't look at him. Thank you. But just tonight. The words landed heavier than she meant them to. Like a boundary. Like a wall. Like a reminder that whatever this was, it wasn't a reunion. It was survival. Alexander nodded, even though she wasn't looking. A few minutes later, room service arrived. Steaming bowls of chicken soup. Bread still warm from the oven. Mugs of hot cocoa crowned with melting marshmallows. The kind of food that felt like childhood, like safety, like someone cared. The twins' eyes lit up when they saw it. They looked at their mother for permission. Isabel nodded, her voice soft. Eat slowly. But her gaze stayed fixed on the window, on the snow swirling in the amber streetlight 42 floors below. On the world she'd left behind for just one night. Alexander stood by the dining table, hands in his pockets, pretending to check his phone. But his attention kept drifting. To the way Isabel smoothed her daughter's hair without thinking. To the tiny cough her son tried to hide. To the way she moved through the world like every moment was a calculation between pride and necessity. When the children finished, their eyelids already heavy, Alexander gathered the empty dishes and set them by the door. Isabel rose, adjusting the blanket on the sofa where the twins had curled together, their small bodies finally warm, finally safe, finally still. "You can take the bedroom. It's warmer." Isabel's tone was final. "I'll stay here." Alexander paused, searching for something to say that wouldn't push her further away. Something that would cross the 5-year gap between them. But there were no words for that. No sentence that could undo what had been done. In the end, he simply nodded. "Good night, Isabel." She didn't answer. But as he turned to leave, he heard her whisper. Almost to herself. Almost to the ghost of who they used to be. "Good night." Alexander closed the door behind him and stood in the hallway, his hand still on the handle, his heart doing things he'd forgotten it could do. Down the hall, in his own bedroom, he wouldn't sleep. He'd sit by the window, watching the city, watching the snow, watching the hours pass and wondering if morning would bring answers or just more questions. In the guest suite, Isabel lay on the sofa, a blanket pulled to her chin, her children breathing softly beside her. She stared at the ceiling, at the shadows moving across it, at the impossible reality of where she was. 5 years ago, she'd left this world. Left him. Left everything. Because staying would have destroyed them both. Because his family had made it clear that she didn't belong. That she never would. That love wasn't enough when power was involved. And now she was back. Not by choice. Not by design. But by the cruelest twist of fate. A misdirected message. A frozen thumb. A wrong number that turned out to be exactly right. She closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come. It never did anymore. Not when survival required vigilance. Not when every moment of peace felt like a trap waiting to spring. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, two people who'd once known everything about each other lay awake in separate rooms, separated by walls and years and truths that hadn't been spoken yet. The night stretched on. The cold pressed against the windows. And somewhere between darkness and dawn, the story that had ended 5 years ago quietly began again. Morning arrived slowly, the way it does in winter. Pale gold light spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the penthouse into something softer, something almost gentle. Isabel woke on the sofa, her body stiff from sleeping in a position that protected rather than rested. A cashmere throw was draped over her. She didn't remember pulling it over herself. Her daughter was still asleep, curled against her side, one small hand clutching fabric. Her son sat cross-legged on the floor, quietly flipping through a book about dinosaurs he must have found on the coffee table. His small fingers traced the illustrations like they held secrets. Isabel sat up slowly, careful not to wake her daughter. Her hair fell in loose strands around her face. She pushed it back, her movements automatic, functional. The smell of coffee drifted through the air. Toast. Eggs. The kind of breakfast that came from someone who knew how to cook, not just how to order food. She stood, following the smell to the kitchen. Alexander was already there, sleeves rolled to his forearms, pouring coffee into a ceramic mug. He looked like he hadn't slept either. There was something in his eyes that said he'd spent the night doing exactly what she'd done. Thinking. Calculating. Trying to make sense of the impossible. He glanced over as she approached. "There's breakfast." His voice was simple. Matter of fact. Like this was normal. Like she hadn't disappeared for 5 years. Like there weren't 2 children in the next room who looked exactly like him. Isabel hesitated before joining him. The twins trailed close behind, their small feet padding softly against the hardwood. The boy reached for a slice of toast, his eyes darting between Alexander and his mother, trying to understand the tension he could feel but not name. "You don't have to do this." Isabel's voice was low but steady. Alexander met her gaze. "It's just breakfast." They ate in relative silence. The kind of silence that's punctuated by small sounds. The clink of cutlery. The rustle of napkins. The occasional giggle from the twins when the boy tried to make his sister laugh by making faces with his orange slices. Alexander found himself watching those moments. The easy rhythm between them. The way the girl would laugh and then cover her mouth like she was embarrassed by her own joy. The way the boy would grin, proud of himself. The way Isabel's eyes would soften when she looked at them, and how quickly they hardened again when she caught Alexander watching. When the plates were cleared, Alexander checked his watch. The movement was automatic. Habit. The kind of thing you did when your life was scheduled down to the minute. I have a meeting in 2 hours. I can arrange for a driver to take you anywhere you need. Isabel straightened, her spine turning to steel. We'll be fine. We won't stay longer than today. A quiet beat hung in the air. The kind of silence that's louder than words. Alexander nodded slowly. At least let me give you something for the kids. Warm clothes. Groceries. No strings. She opened her mouth to refuse. The refusal was already there, already formed, already ready to protect her pride. But then her son coughed. That same dry, rasping sound. Wrong. Too small. Too fragile. Her eyes flickered with something Alexander recognized. Fear. The kind of fear that came from knowing you couldn't fix something. From knowing that pride was a luxury you couldn't afford. I'll take him to see a doctor. Alexander's offer came immediately. No hesitation. No calculation. Just certainty. Isabel looked at her son. At the way he was trying to hide the cough. At the way he was trying to be brave because he thought that's what she needed. And in that moment, the decision was already made. Only the doctor. That's it. Alexander nodded. Only the doctor. An hour later, they stepped into the cold again. The city was quieter in the morning. The snow had stopped, but it had left everything covered in white. The kind of white that made the city look cleaner than it was. The kind of white that hid the grime underneath. They walked 3 blocks to a private clinic. The kind of place that didn't take walk-ins, that required appointments made weeks in advance, that catered to people who valued discretion over insurance networks. But Alexander made a call, and doors opened. That's what money did. It turned locked doors into welcome mats. Inside, the warmth was almost startling. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and expensive air fresheners trying to mask it. A nurse with kind eyes and graying hair ushered them to the pediatric wing. She smiled at the children, her voice soft. "And what's your name, sweetheart?" The boy looked at his mother for permission. Isabel nodded. "Daniel." The nurse smiled wider. "Well, Daniel, let's see what we can do about that cough, okay?" She led them to an examination room. Pale blue walls. Cartoon animals painted near the ceiling. A small examination table with paper that crinkled when Daniel climbed up. The nurse took his temperature, checked his oxygen levels, made notes on a tablet. Then she turned to Alexander, still smiling. "Dad, you can fill out the forms here." Isabel's head snapped up. Her eyes went to Alexander. Wide. Sharp. A warning and a question all at once. Alexander had already taken the clipboard. His pen paused for only a second. One heartbeat. One moment of decision. And then he wrote his name in the space marked parent/guardian. Isabel watched, her expression unreadable. Something flickered in her eyes. Unease. Anger. Maybe something else. Something softer. But it was gone before Alexander could name it. When the nurse walked away, clipboard in hand, the silence in the room was deafening. Daniel sat on the examination table, swinging his legs, oblivious. His sister sat in a chair beside Isabel, playing with a stuffed rabbit someone had left behind. Isabel spoke quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't have to do that." Alexander looked at her. Really looked at her. At the walls she'd built. At the armor she wore. At the exhaustion she couldn't quite hide. "I wanted to." The pediatrician entered before Isabel could respond. A woman in her 40s with calm eyes and a voice that sounded like she'd seen everything and been surprised by nothing. She listened to Daniel's breathing through her stethoscope, checked his throat, made thoughtful humming sounds. After a few minutes, she stepped back. "It's a mild respiratory infection. Nothing serious, but it needs attention. We'll start him on antibiotics and make sure he stays hydrated. He should be fine in a few days." Isabel let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her shoulders dropped. Just slightly. Just enough for Alexander to notice. The doctor handed Alexander a prescription slip. "Make sure he finishes the full course. And keep him warm. Cold air will make it worse." Alexander took the prescription, nodded his thanks. The doctor smiled at Daniel, ruffled his hair gently. You're going to be just fine, buddy. Daniel smiled back. A small, shy smile that made him look even younger than 4. Outside, the air was sharp, biting. Snowflakes drifted lazily from a white sky. Isabel pulled her coat tighter around herself, her daughter pressed against her side. Daniel walked close to Alexander, not touching, but close enough that it meant something. I'll drive you to the pharmacy. Alexander's tone left no room for argument. Isabel started to shake her head. We can walk. It's close. But Alexander was already gesturing to the car that had been following at a discreet distance. The driver pulled up. The back door opened. Isabel looked at the car, then at her children, then at the snow starting to fall harder. She made a calculation. Pride versus practicality. The children won. They always did. She climbed in. The pharmacy was only 4 blocks away, but the drive felt longer. The twins sat between them, a small buffer zone of innocence. Daniel leaned against Isabel. His sister leaned against Alexander. It happened naturally, unconsciously, like children do when they're tired and someone feels safe. Alexander noticed. He noticed everything. At the pharmacy, Alexander handed the prescriptions to the pharmacist while Isabel browsed a small shelf of children's thermometers. Her fingers moved over the boxes, checking prices, calculating costs, doing mental math that Alexander recognized. The math of someone who counted every dollar because they had to. He returned with a small paper bag, the prescriptions already filled and paid for. He didn't mention the cost. Didn't make a show of it. Just handed her the bag. They walked back to the car in silence. Once they were all settled inside, Alexander turned to her. Do you have enough for food this week? His tone was careful. Not pitying. Not condescending. Just asking. Isabel's jaw tightened. We'll manage. That's not what I asked. Her eyes flicked to him, sharp and guarded. We'll be fine, Alexander. The way she said his name. Like a reminder. Like a boundary. Like a warning that they weren't who they used to be. They rode back to the penthouse in silence. The city moved past the windows. People going about their lives. Unaware. Unconcerned. Living in a world that didn't include park benches and misdirected messages, and 5 years of silence finally breaking. When they arrived back at the building, Isabel immediately began gathering their things. The few items they'd brought. The coats Alexander had given them. She moved with purpose, with finality. We'll leave this afternoon. Alexander's brow furrowed. Where will you go? Isabel didn't look at him. That's not your concern. It is. His voice was low, but there was steel underneath it. An unyielding quality that said this wasn't a request. Whether you like it or not, it is. Isabel turned to face him, ready to argue, ready to push back. But before she could say anything, Daniel started coughing again. Harder this time. His small body shaking with the effort. Isabel immediately crouched down, rubbing his back, her face a mask of controlled panic. Alexander knelt beside her, his hand hovering near Daniel's shoulder, wanting to help but not knowing if he was allowed. The coughing subsided. Daniel's breathing evened out. But his face was flushed, his eyes watery. Isabel looked at Alexander. Really looked at him. And in that moment, pride lost to love. 2 days. No more. Her voice was quiet but firm. Alexander nodded. 2 days. But they both knew it was already more complicated than that. That night, after the twins had been given their medicine and put to bed, after stories had been read and foreheads had been kissed, Isabel sat by the window in the living room. The city spread out below her like a sea of lights. 42 floors up, the world looked different. Cleaner. Safer. Like problems were smaller from this height. Alexander appeared from his study holding 2 glasses of red wine. He set one in front of her without asking if she wanted it. Then he sat in the chair across from her, the coffee table between them like neutral territory. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just sat there, 2 people who used to know everything about each other, now strangers separated by time and choices and truths that hadn't been spoken. Finally, Alexander broke the silence. 5 years ago. Why didn't you tell me? His voice was soft, but there was pain underneath it. Old pain. The kind that had been living in him for so long it had become part of his architecture. Isabel's fingers tightened around the wine glass. She didn't drink. Just held it. Because it wouldn't have changed anything. Not with your family. You don't know that. She looked at him then. Her eyes steady, filled with ghosts only she could see. I know exactly what they're capable of. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they weren't saying. With 5 years of questions that had no good answers. Outside, the city glittered. A million lights pretending to be promises. And somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. Someone else's emergency. Someone else's crisis. The city never stopped. Never slept. Never cared about the small human dramas playing out in apartments and penthouses and park benches. Alexander leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. Tell me what happened. After you left. Tell me everything. Isabel looked away, back to the window, back to the lights. What's the point? It's done. It's over. It's not over. His voice was quiet but certain. You're here. They're here. That means it's not over. Isabel was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after I left. I was in Philadelphia, staying with a friend from college. I didn't have your number anymore. Your family made sure of that. They made sure of a lot of things. She paused, took a breath. I thought about coming back. Every single day for the first 6 months, I thought about it. But then I'd remember what your mother said. What she promised would happen if I didn't disappear. And I knew. I knew that loving you wasn't enough. Not when people like that decide you're a problem. Alexander's hands tightened into fists. His jaw clenched. What did she say? Isabel shook her head. It doesn't matter now. It matters to me. She finally looked at him. And in her eyes was something he'd never seen before. Not anger. Not sadness. Something colder. Something harder. She said if I didn't leave, she'd make sure you lost everything. The company. Your reputation. Your future. She said she'd fabricate scandals, plant evidence, destroy everything you'd worked for. And she said she'd make sure I knew it was my fault. That I was the reason your life fell apart. Alexander stood abruptly, the movement sharp, sudden. He walked to the window, his back to her, his hands clenched at his sides. I would have fought for you. His voice was rough. Isabel's laugh was bitter. You were 26 years old, Alexander. Your father had just died. You'd just taken over the company. You were barely holding it together. And I was a girl from Queens with student debt and no connections. We both know how that fight would have ended. He turned to face her. You should have let me try. I did let you try. For 2 years, I let you try. And your family spent every single day of those 2 years trying to break us. Your mother. Your uncle. Even your board of directors. They all made it very clear that I was temporary. That eventually, you'd see reason. So you just left. His voice cracked slightly. So I just left. The words hung in the air between them. Final. Irrevocable. The truth that had lived in silence for 5 years. Alexander crossed the room and sat down again, this time on the sofa, closer to her. Not touching, but close enough that the space between them felt charged. And the twins? Isabel set down her wine glass. I found out I was having twins at my 20-week ultrasound. A boy and a girl. Daniel and Sophia. I picked their names alone. I went to every appointment alone. I gave birth alone. I brought them home to a 1-bedroom apartment in Philadelphia alone. And I raised them alone. Because that's what your mother wanted. That's what she paid for. Paid for? Alexander's voice went cold. Isabel reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Old. Worn. Like it had been carried for years. She unfolded it carefully and handed it to him. It was a bank statement. 5 years old. Showing a deposit of $50,000 with a memo line that read settlement. Final. Alexander stared at it, his face going pale. She paid you to leave. Isabel's voice was steady, but there was something broken underneath it. She paid me to disappear. And I took it. Because I was pregnant and terrified, and I needed to know my children would have food and shelter and a chance. So yes, I took the money. And I used it to survive. To give them a life. And every single day, I hated myself for it. Alexander's hands were shaking. He set the paper down on the coffee table like it was burning him. I'm going to kill her. His voice was barely above a whisper, but the rage in it was volcanic. Isabel shook her head. No. You're not. Because she's still your mother. And because going to war with her means going to war with the entire Graves Empire. And you'll lose. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But eventually, you'll lose. Because people like her don't lose. They just burn everything down and walk away. Alexander looked at her, his eyes blazing. Then we burn it down together. The words hung in the air. A promise. A threat. A declaration. Isabel stood, wrapping her arms around herself. I didn't come back for this. I didn't come back to drag you into my mess. The text was an accident. A wrong number. In 2 days, we'll be gone and you can go back to your life. You think I can just go back? Alexander stood too, closing the distance between them. You think I can just pretend I didn't see you on that bench? Pretend I didn't see my children freezing in the street? Pretend I don't know what she did? They're not your children. The words came out sharp, defensive. A last wall going up. Alexander's voice dropped, quiet and certain. Yes, they are. Isabel's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. You don't know that. I know. He took one step closer. I know because Daniel has my eyes. Sophia has my mother's chin, ironically. I know because they're 4 years old and the math adds up perfectly. I know because when I wrote my name on that form today, it felt like the first true thing I've done in 5 years. Isabel turned away, her shoulders shaking. This isn't fair. No. It's not. Alexander's voice was gentle now. None of this is fair. But it's real. And I'm not walking away from it. From them. From you. Isabel faced him again, her eyes fierce. Your mother will destroy us. Then let her try. The moment stretched between them. Charged. Dangerous. Full of possibility and ruin all at once. And then, from down the hall, a small voice called out. Mama. The spell broke. Isabel immediately moved toward the hallway. Alexander watched her go, his heart pounding, his mind racing. In the guest bedroom, Sophia was sitting up in bed, rubbing her eyes. I had a bad dream. Her voice was small, sleepy. Isabel sat on the edge of the bed and pulled her daughter into her arms. It's okay, baby. It's just a dream. You're safe. Sophia nestled against her mother's chest. Is the nice man still here? Isabel's breath caught. Yes. He's still here. Good. He makes you less sad. The words hit Isabel like a physical blow. She closed her eyes, held her daughter tighter. Go back to sleep, sweet girl. Sophia was already drifting off, her breathing evening out. Isabel sat there for a long time, just holding her, feeling the weight of every decision she'd made, every choice that had led to this moment. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, Alexander was still in the living room. He'd poured himself another glass of wine but hadn't touched it. She thinks I'm less sad when you're around. Isabel's voice was quiet. Alexander looked up. Are you? Isabel didn't answer. Instead, she sat back down, picked up her own wine glass, and finally took a drink. What happens now? Alexander leaned forward. Now we stop running. Now we figure this out. Together. Your mother won't allow it. Then we don't give her a choice. Isabel looked at him, searching his face for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that this was just adrenaline talking. But all she saw was certainty. You're serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Outside, the night pressed against the windows. The city hummed its endless song. And inside a penthouse 42 floors above the world, 2 people who'd been torn apart 5 years ago sat in the wreckage of their past and started building something that might, against all odds, look like a future. But neither of them knew that 3 blocks away, in another building just as tall, just as cold, Victoria Graves was sitting at her desk, scrolling through a report her private investigator had just sent. A report that included photographs, time-stamped, geo-tagged, showing her son entering a clinic with a woman and 2 children, showing them leaving together, showing them returning to his building. Victoria set down her phone and smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a kind smile. The smile of a woman who'd played this game before and won. She picked up her office line and dialed a number she had memorized. It rang twice before a smooth, professional voice answered. Lawrence Chen speaking. Victoria's voice was calm, controlled. We have a problem. The Torres girl is back. And she's brought complications. There was a pause on the other end. I'll handle it. See that you do. And Lawrence. This time, make sure she understands the permanence of her departure. Victoria hung up and returned her attention to the photographs. She studied them for a long moment. Her son's face. The way he was looking at that woman. The way he was standing close to those children. She'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much, built too carefully to let it all fall apart because her son couldn't control his sentimentality. Some problems, she thought, required permanent solutions. And Victoria Graves had never been afraid of permanence. The morning arrived with the kind of silence that felt like a warning. Isabel woke before dawn, her body still programmed for survival, for vigilance, for the constant awareness that safety was temporary. The twins were still asleep, their small bodies curled together in the massive bed, looking impossibly small against all that luxury. She moved quietly through the guest suite, gathering their things. The few items they'd brought. The coats Alexander had given them. She folded everything with careful precision, her movements automatic, practiced. This was what she knew how to do. Leave before things got complicated. Before staying became dangerous. But then Daniel coughed in his sleep. That same rattling sound. And Isabel's hands stilled on the coat she was folding. 2 days. She'd promised 2 days. In the kitchen, Alexander was already awake. He'd been awake most of the night, sitting in his study, making calls, sending encrypted emails, building a strategy. If his mother wanted war, he'd give her war. But this time, he wouldn't lose. He heard Isabel moving in the guest suite. Heard the quiet sounds of someone preparing to run. He poured 2 cups of coffee and waited. When Isabel emerged, her hair pulled back, her face carefully neutral, Alexander was sitting at the kitchen counter. He slid one of the coffee cups toward her. You're up early. His tone was conversational. Casual. Like he didn't notice she'd been packing. Isabel took the coffee but didn't sit. Couldn't sleep. Alexander nodded, took a sip of his own coffee. I've been thinking. About what you said last night. About my mother. Isabel's grip tightened on her cup. Alexander. No. Listen. You were right. She won't stop. She'll keep coming. She'll use every resource, every connection, every dirty trick she knows. And she knows a lot of them. Isabel set down her cup. Then you understand why we need to leave. Alexander stood, moved around the counter until he was facing her directly. I understand why you think you need to leave. But running didn't work 5 years ago. It just delayed this conversation. And I'm not interested in delaying anymore. What are you saying? I'm saying we get ahead of her. We control the narrative before she can spin it. We go public. Isabel's eyes went wide. You've lost your mind. Maybe. But I've spent 5 years living a half-life. Pretending I didn't care that you were gone. Pretending it didn't destroy me. I'm done pretending. He took a step closer. I want to claim my children. Publicly. Legally. I want the world to know they're mine. And I want everyone to know exactly what my mother did to keep us apart. That will ruin you. Alexander's laugh was bitter. I run a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure company. My reputation is built on integrity and transparency. You know what ruins that? Lies. Secrets. The things we hide. But the truth? The truth is I fell in love with an incredible woman. She got pregnant. My mother paid her to disappear. And I spent 5 years not knowing I had children. That's not a scandal. That's a tragedy. And people understand tragedy. Isabel shook her head, backing away. You don't know what you're asking. I'm not asking. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. Whether you help me or not. The words hung between them. Not a threat. A declaration. Before Isabel could respond, her phone rang. The sound was jarring in the quiet apartment. She pulled it from her pocket, looked at the screen. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. Hello. The voice on the other end was smooth, professional, male. Ms. Torres. My name is Lawrence Chen. I'm an attorney representing the Graves family. I believe we should talk. Isabel's face went pale. Her eyes shot to Alexander. How did you get this number? Lawrence Chen's tone didn't change. Calm, controlled, utterly confident. Ms. Torres, I think you know that's not the relevant question. The relevant question is what happens next. And I'd like to discuss that with you. Privately. Today. There's a cafe on Madison and 63rd. I'll be there at 10 a.m. I suggest you come alone. The line went dead. Isabel lowered the phone, her hand trembling slightly. Alexander was already moving toward her. Who was that? Isabel's voice was hollow. Lawrence Chen. Your mother's attorney. He wants to meet. Alexander's expression darkened. You're not going. I have to. No. You don't. Whatever he's going to offer, whatever threats he's going to make, we already know the playbook. Isabel looked at him, her eyes filled with something that looked like resignation. Which is exactly why I need to hear it. I need to know what she's planning. What she's willing to do. Because if we're really going to fight this, I need to know what we're up against. Then I'm coming with you. No. Isabel's voice was firm. If you come, he won't talk. He'll just walk away and we'll have learned nothing. I need to do this alone. Alexander wanted to argue. Every instinct in him screamed to protect her, to stand between her and whatever his mother had planned. But he also knew she was right. Lawrence Chen was many things, but he was also a strategist. And strategists didn't reveal their plans when the opposition was listening. Fine. But you wear a wire. Audio recording. Everything he says, I hear. Isabel started to protest. Alexander cut her off. Non-negotiable. You want to go alone? Fine. But I'm not letting you walk into that meeting completely unprotected. After a long moment, Isabel nodded. Okay. 2 hours later, Isabel sat in a corner booth at a cafe that was trying very hard to look European and expensive. The kind of place that charged $12 for coffee and called it artisanal. Lawrence Chen was already there when she arrived, sitting with his back to the wall, a perfect view of the entrance. He was exactly what she expected. Mid-50s, immaculately dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her rent used to be, with silver hair and the kind of face that had learned to show only what he wanted you to see. He stood when she approached, extended his hand. Ms. Torres. Thank you for coming. His handshake was brief, professional. Isabel sat across from him, her coat still on, her purse in her lap. Everything about her body language said she wasn't staying long. Lawrence Chen sat back down, signaled to a waiter, ordered 2 cappuccinos without asking what Isabel wanted. Once the waiter left, Chen folded his hands on the table and smiled. It was the smile of a man who held all the cards and knew it. I'll be direct. Mrs. Graves is concerned about the current situation. Your return to New York. Your contact with her son. The children. Isabel's voice was steady. They're his children. He has a right to know them. Chen's smile didn't waver. Perhaps. But rights are complicated things, Ms. Torres. Especially when they conflict with other interests. Mrs. Graves has built something remarkable over the past 40 years. A legacy. An empire. She's not willing to see that compromised. I'm not trying to compromise anything. I'm just trying to take care of my children. Of course. And Mrs. Graves understands that. Which is why she's prepared to be quite generous. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. He slid it across the table. Inside, you'll find a contract. Mrs. Graves is offering you $2 million. In exchange, you agree to relocate. Somewhere comfortable. California, perhaps. Or abroad, if you prefer. You'll sign over any parental claims to Alexander Graves. You'll agree to a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. And you'll ensure that your children have no contact with the Graves family. Isabel stared at the folder like it was a snake. You want me to sell my children? Chen's expression didn't change. I want you to accept a generous settlement that ensures your children's financial security while protecting a family business that employs 15,000 people worldwide. Surely you can see the wisdom in that. Isabel's hands clenched into fists under the table. And if I refuse? Chen's smile finally faded. His voice dropped, becoming colder, harder. Then things become unpleasant. We'll start by questioning your fitness as a mother. A woman who's been evicted twice in 5 years. Who's moved her children between 6 different addresses. Who was recently found homeless on a park bench in the middle of winter. Those were lies mixed with just enough truth to be dangerous. We'll petition for emergency custody based on neglect. We'll tie you up in court for years. Legal fees will destroy you. You'll lose your children anyway, but instead of $2 million, you'll have nothing. You'll be alone. And you'll have no one to blame but yourself. The cafe suddenly felt very cold. Isabel leaned forward, her voice low but fierce. You think I'm going to let you threaten me? After what your client already did to me? Chen leaned back, completely unruffled. I'm not threatening you, Ms. Torres. I'm explaining reality. Mrs. Graves has unlimited resources. You have none. This is a fight you cannot win. So I'm offering you a way out. A way that lets you keep your dignity and gives your children a stable future. I suggest you take it. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket. You have 48 hours to decide. After that, the offer is withdrawn and we proceed with litigation. He placed a business card on the table. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable. Then he walked out, leaving Isabel sitting alone with a folder full of poison and a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. 3 blocks away, in his penthouse, Alexander listened to every word through the wireless earpiece connected to the recording device Isabel wore. His hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. His jaw was set in a way that would have terrified anyone who knew him well. When Chen walked out and the recording went silent except for Isabel's breathing, Alexander yanked out the earpiece and threw it across the room. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. It was answered on the first ring. Marissa Grant speaking. Alexander's voice was cold, controlled fury. I need you at my office in 1 hour. Bring everything you have on hostile board takeovers and public whistleblowing. We're going to war. There was a brief pause. Then Marissa's voice came back, sharper, more focused. Against who? My mother. Another pause. Longer this time. I'll be there in 30 minutes. When Isabel returned to the penthouse, Alexander was waiting in the living room. The folder Chen had given her was still in her hands. She set it on the coffee table like it was contaminated. Alexander looked at her, his expression carefully neutral. You okay? Isabel laughed, but there was no humor in it. Define okay. She sat down heavily on the sofa. $2 million. That's what I'm worth. That's what she thinks it costs to make me disappear. Alexander sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. You're not taking it. It wasn't a question. Isabel looked at him. What if I should? What if that's the smart play? Take the money, move somewhere quiet, raise my kids without this hanging over us? Alexander's voice was gentle but firm. You don't believe that. If you did, you would have taken the first 50,000 and never looked back. But you didn't. You kept fighting. You kept surviving. Because you're not someone who runs when things get hard. I ran from you. The words were quiet, painful. Alexander shook his head. No. You were forced out. There's a difference. He reached over and took her hand. She didn't pull away. We fight this. Together. We expose what she did. We take away her power by taking away her secrets. And if we lose, then we lose fighting. But at least our children will know we tried. They'll know we didn't just give up and let someone buy us off. Isabel looked down at their joined hands. I'm scared. So am I. His honesty surprised her. She looked up, met his eyes. But I'm more scared of spending another 5 years wondering what if. What if I'd fought harder? What if I'd trusted you to handle the truth? What if I'd been braver? He squeezed her hand. I'm done with what ifs. I want what is. Before Isabel could respond, there was a knock at the door. Alexander stood, checked the security monitor. Marissa Grant stood in the hallway, carrying a leather briefcase and looking like she was ready for battle. Alexander opened the door. That was fast. Marissa walked in, her eyes immediately going to Isabel. You must be the woman who's about to help me take down Victoria Graves. I'm Marissa Grant, Alexander's attorney. And as of 30 minutes ago, yours too if you'll have me. She set her briefcase on the dining table, opened it, and pulled out a legal pad covered in notes. I've been wanting to go after Victoria for years. She's corrupt, manipulative, and has been using the Graves Company as her personal piggy bank for the last decade. But she's also smart and well protected. Until now. She looked between Alexander and Isabel. A secret child. A payoff. Documented threats. This is exactly the kind of human story that breaks through corporate armor. But we need to be strategic. We need to control how this comes out. How? Isabel's voice was hesitant. Marissa sat down, gestured for them to join her. We go public. But we do it right. First, Alexander, you call an emergency board meeting. You tell them everything. You present evidence of Victoria's financial improprieties. You make it clear that her actions were personal, vindictive, and potentially illegal. And me? Isabel asked. Marissa turned to her. You do a press conference. You tell your story. All of it. The relationship. The pregnancy. The payoff. The threats. You make yourself sympathetic. You make Victoria the villain. Which, let's be honest, won't be hard. Isabel's face went pale. I can't stand in front of cameras and talk about this. Yes, you can. Because if you don't, Victoria will craft her own narrative. She'll paint you as a gold digger. A manipulator. Someone who trapped her son and is now trying to extort the family. She'll destroy your reputation before you even know what hit you. Marissa's voice softened slightly. I know it's terrifying. But the truth is your best weapon. And I'll help you every step of the way. Isabel looked at Alexander. He nodded slowly. She's right. We control the story or the story controls us. Isabel took a deep breath, then another. Finally, she nodded. Okay. What do we do first? Marissa smiled. It was the smile of a lawyer who'd just been handed a winning case. First, we document everything. Every text, every email, every bank statement. We build an airtight case. Then we move fast before Victoria can mount a defense. She looked at Alexander. Can you get me access to board meeting minutes from the last 5 years? Alexander nodded. I can get you everything. Good. Because we're going to need it. The next 48 hours were a blur. Alexander pulled files, emails, financial records. Isabel gave a 5-hour deposition to Marissa, recounting every detail of her relationship with Alexander, the threats from Victoria, the money, the years in hiding. The twins stayed with a trusted friend of Marissa's, a grandmother type who ran a small daycare and asked no questions. It killed Isabel to be separated from them, but she knew they couldn't be part of this. Not yet. Not until it was safe. On the second night, as Isabel and Alexander sat in his study reviewing documents, Isabel's phone rang. Unknown number again. She answered, her voice wary. Hello, Ms. Torres. It's Lawrence Chen. I'm calling to see if you've made a decision. Isabel looked at Alexander. He nodded, pressed record on the device they'd set up. I have. Her voice was steady. Excellent. I'll send a courier for the signed contracts tomorrow morning. No. Isabel's voice was clear, firm. I'm not taking the money. I'm not leaving. And I'm not giving up my rights to my children. Tell Mrs. Graves that if she wants a fight, she'll get one. But this time, it won't be in the shadows. It'll be in broad daylight where everyone can see exactly what kind of person she is. There was a long pause on the other end. Ms. Torres, I strongly advise you to reconsider. I've done nothing but reconsider for 5 years. I'm done. Tell your client to expect a call from my attorney. Her name is Marissa Grant. I'm sure Victoria knows her. Isabel hung up. Alexander looked at her, something like pride in his eyes. That was perfect. Isabel's hands were shaking. She set the phone down carefully. I think I'm going to be sick. Alexander stood, moved to her side. You're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. How can you be so sure? Because I've been playing corporate chess my entire life. And Victoria taught me everything I know. Which means I know exactly how she thinks. And I know her weaknesses. What weaknesses? She seems pretty invincible to me. Alexander's smile was cold. Arrogance. She thinks she's untouchable. That nobody would dare challenge her. That's going to be her downfall. The next morning, Alexander walked into the Graves Global headquarters for an emergency board meeting he'd called without Victoria's knowledge. The boardroom was already full when he arrived. 12 board members, all powerful, all connected, all loyal to Victoria in varying degrees. Victoria herself sat at the head of the table, her expression calm but her eyes were sharp. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know what. Alexander took his seat at the opposite end of the table. Thank you all for coming on short notice. His voice was steady, professional. Victoria's smile was thin. This is highly irregular, Alexander. Emergency meetings require board approval. Which is why I'm grateful you're all here to approve it retroactively. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of folders. I've called this meeting because I've discovered some disturbing irregularities in our financial records. Specifically, unauthorized transfers from company accounts to personal accounts. Payments made to third parties without board approval. And evidence of funds being used for personal matters rather than company business. He began distributing the folders. Victoria's expression didn't change, but her knuckles went white where they gripped her pen. Each of you has a copy of the documentation. I think you'll find it quite illuminating. The board members opened their folders. Alexander watched their faces change as they read. Confusion. Then concern. Then anger. One of the older board members, a man named Richard Castellano, looked up. These payments. Victoria, can you explain them? Victoria's voice was calm, but there was an edge underneath. Those are operational expenses. Consulting fees. Standard business practice. Alexander leaned forward. Consulting fees paid to a shell corporation that happens to be owned by your personal attorney. Payments that total over $3 million in the last 2 years alone. He pulled out another document. And this payment. $50,000. Labeled as settlement. Final. Care to explain who was being settled and why company funds were used? Victoria's eyes went ice cold. That was a personnel matter. Confidential. Alexander's voice dropped, became harder. It was a payoff. To silence a woman who was pregnant with my children. A woman you threatened and coerced into leaving New York. That's not a personnel matter. That's a crime. The room exploded. Board members talking over each other. Demands for explanation. Calls for investigation. Victoria stood, her voice cutting through the chaos. This is a personal vendetta. My son is trying to stage a coup because I refused to accept his poor judgment in romantic partners. Alexander stood as well. This isn't about romance. This is about you using company resources for personal vendettas. This is about you breaking fiduciary duty. This is about corruption. He looked around the table. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence. I'm asking this board to suspend Victoria Graves from all company operations pending a full external audit. The room went silent. Victoria's laugh was bitter. You don't have the votes. These people are loyal to me. Alexander met her eyes. These people are loyal to the company. And when they see what you've done, they'll do what's right. Richard Castellano cleared his throat. I move to second the vote of no confidence. Another board member raised her hand. I third the motion. Victoria's face went pale. The vote was called. 9-3. Victoria was suspended. She stood there for a long moment, staring at her son with something that looked like hatred and heartbreak all at once. Then she gathered her things and walked out without a word. That same afternoon, 3 blocks away, Isabel stood in front of a wall of microphones in a press conference room that Marissa had arranged. The twins were still safely away. This moment was Isabel's alone. The room was packed. Reporters from every major outlet. Cameras pointed at her like weapons. The lights were hot, blinding. Marissa stood beside her, a steady presence. Isabel took a breath and began. My name is Isabel Torres. 5 years ago, I was in love with Alexander Graves. We planned a future together. That future ended when members of his family made it very clear that if I stayed, they would destroy everything he'd worked for. Everything he cared about. They told me that loving him was selfish. That staying would ruin him. So I left. Her voice was steady but emotion leaked through. 3 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. With twins. I wanted to tell him. I tried. But his family had made sure I couldn't reach him. They'd changed his numbers. They'd cut off every avenue of contact. So I did what I thought was right. I disappeared. I raised my children alone. And I told myself I was protecting them. Protecting him. She paused, gathering strength. Last week, I was sitting on a park bench with my children, freezing, desperate, trying to find shelter. I sent a text message asking a friend for help. But the message went to the wrong number. It went to Alexander. And he came. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He just came. Her voice broke slightly. Now his family is threatening me again. Offering me money to disappear. Threatening to take my children if I refuse. But I'm done running. My children deserve to know their father. And we deserve to live without fear. She looked directly into the nearest camera. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm not asking for money. I'm just asking to be left alone to raise my children with the man I love. That's it. That's all I've ever wanted. The room erupted with questions. Flashes going off like lightning. But Isabel just stood there, Marissa's hand on her shoulder, and let the truth speak for itself. By nightfall, the story was everywhere. Every news site. Every social media platform. Hashtags trending. Public opinion turning sharply, viciously, against Victoria Graves. The narrative Marissa had crafted was perfect. A young couple torn apart by family greed. A woman forced to raise twins alone while a billionaire family tried to erase her existence. It was David and Goliath. It was Romeo and Juliet. It was every underdog story people wanted to believe in. And Victoria, despite all her power, all her connections, all her money, couldn't fight it. Because it was true. That night, Isabel and Alexander sat in his penthouse, watching the news coverage. The twins were asleep in the guest room, finally back where Isabel could protect them. Alexander had his arm around Isabel's shoulders. She leaned against him, exhausted but relieved. It's really over. Her voice was quiet, uncertain. Alexander pressed a kiss to her forehead. The war is over. Now we just have the cleanup. Isabel looked up at him. What happens to your mother? Alexander's jaw tightened. The board will likely force her to resign. There'll be an investigation. Probably lawsuits. Her reputation is destroyed. Everything she built, everything she valued, it's gone. Do you feel bad? Alexander was quiet for a long moment. I feel sad. For the mother I thought I had. The one who might have existed before power corrupted her. But the woman she became. The one who did this to you. To us? No. I don't feel bad for her. Isabel nodded, understanding. What about us? What happens now? Alexander turned to face her fully, took both her hands in his. Now we build the life we should have had 5 years ago. We raise our children together. We get to know each other again. We figure out who we are now, not who we were. And if it doesn't work, if we've changed too much, then we figure that out too. But I'd rather try and fail than spend another 5 years wondering what if. Isabel smiled. A real smile. The first one Alexander had seen in days. Okay. Let's try. 3 weeks later, On a cold but clear Saturday morning, Alexander, Isabel, and the twins stood outside a renovated brownstone in the Lower East Side. The building had been abandoned for years, but Alexander had bought it, renovated it, and turned it into affordable housing for families who needed it. Today was the opening. Families were already moving in. Children running through hallways. Parents carrying boxes. Hope filling spaces that had been empty for too long. A small group of reporters lingered, but they kept their distance. This wasn't about scandal anymore. This was about redemption. Daniel tugged on Alexander's hand. "Daddy, can we go inside?" The word still made Alexander's chest tighten. Daddy. He'd never get tired of hearing it. "Of course, buddy." He scooped Daniel up, then reached for Sophia with his other arm. Isabel walked beside him, her hand in his. They toured the building, greeting families, listening to stories, witnessing small miracles of people getting second chances. When they finally stepped back outside, the winter sun was high and bright. The cold didn't feel as sharp anymore. Isabel paused on the sidewalk, looking back at the building. "You did a good thing here." Alexander shook his head. "We did a good thing. This was your idea. That night on the bench. You inspired this." Isabel leaned against him. "I can't believe this is real. That we're really here. That we actually won." Alexander kissed the top of her head. "We didn't win. We survived. There's a difference. But it's a good difference." "Yeah, it is." They walked home along Delancey Street, the same street where everything had changed. The same bench was still there, dusted with fresh snow. They paused beside it. Isabel ran her hand over the cold metal. "This is where it all started. Again." Alexander pulled her close. "And where it keeps going." Sophia tugged on Isabel's coat. "Mama, I'm cold. Can we go home?" Isabel smiled, looked at Alexander. "Yeah, baby. Let's go home." And for the first time in 5 years, home meant the same place for all of them. As they walked away, the camera of life seemed to pull back. 4 figures moving through the snow. A family rebuilt from broken pieces. Not perfect. Not without scars. But real. And whole. And finally free. The city moved around them. Indifferent. Eternal. Full of other stories, other struggles, other people fighting their own battles. But for these 4, on this day, in this moment, the battle was over. They'd survived the cold. They'd survived the darkness. They'd survived everything designed to tear them apart. And in the end, love hadn't just endured. It had won. Snowflakes began to fall again, soft and gentle, covering the city in white. But this time, walking together, hands joined, children laughing, none of them felt the cold. Because they'd found what they'd been searching for all along. Not shelter from the storm, but shelter in each other. And that was enough. That was everything. And that's where their journey, born from a freezing night on a park bench and a message sent to the wrong number, found its warmest ending. A story of love lost and found again. Of family torn apart and rebuilt stronger. Of courage in the face of impossible odds. Thank you for staying with this story from that first desperate moment on a frozen bench to this final step toward home. Your time, your attention, your heart, it all means everything. If this story touched you, if it made you believe in second chances, if it reminded you that love is worth fighting for, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Untold Desires by Mr. Lewis for more stories that will move you, challenge you, and remind you of the beautiful, messy, miraculous nature of being human. Tomorrow, we'll be back with another story. Another journey. Another reminder that even in the coldest winters, hope survives. Until then, remember this, the people worth loving are always worth fighting for. And sometimes, the wrong number turns out to be exactly right. See you in the next story.